If you're tired of surface-level history and want the truth behind the front lines, subscribe now. Today, we're breaking open a forgotten piece of the Pacific War that most books reduce to a footnote, if they mention it at all. This isn't a story about superior firepower or heroic last stands. It's about how one Marine exploited a flaw so basic, so human, that an entire Japanese battalion spent 5 days walking into its own destruction without understanding why. In late 1943 on Bougainville, the battlefield wasn't decided by artillery or airstrikes. It was decided by perception. And perception is where this story begins. Bougainville was not a place where traditional tactics thrived. Dense jungle erased long sight lines. Sound travelled unpredictably. Visibility came and went with clouds, canopy gaps and shifting light. Japanese forces relied heavily on observation posts and sniper networks to maintain control. Their doctrine emphasized investigation. Anything unusual was to be seen, identified, categorized, and reported. That instinct wasn't a weakness. It was how disciplined armies survived chaos. But every doctrine carries blind spots, and Bougainville exposed one that no amount of training could eliminate. Thomas Michael Callahan did not think like most Marines because he had learned his lessons long before the war. Growing up hunting in Montana taught him something sniper schools later put into words. Living creatures react differently to uncertainty. Animals withdraw. Soldiers lean forward. They want to understand. That distinction mattered. When Callahan entered Marine sniper training, instructors noticed he didn't rush shots. He waited for conditions to align because he understood that control came before contact. One instructor summarized it bluntly. The shot ends the operation. It doesn't begin it. That idea followed Callahan to Bougainville. On November 8, 1943, Callahan's spotter was killed by a Japanese sniper who fired once and vanished. No follow-up shot. No mistake. Callahan immediately recognized what kind of opponent he faced. This was not a sniper to be hunted with standard methods. Matching patience with patience would only produce another body. Instead of, asking for fire missions or reinforcements, Callahan asked for permission to operate outside doctrine. His logic was actually quite simple. If he could not force the enemy into revealing themselves, well, he would make them choose to do it. The idea, interestingly enough, did not come from cleverness. It came from observation. Light in the jungle is rare, directional, and, noticeable. While eating rations one evening, Callahan noticed how the rim of an empty soup can court sunlight and threw a sharp glint across the forest floor. That glint was ambiguous. It wasn't muzzle flash. It wasn't a signal. It wasn't random either. And, ambiguity is just irresistible to trained observers. Callahan realized he could create stimuli that demanded investigation without revealing a shooter's location. Callahan planted several cans on thin stakes, angled so they would reflect sunlight briefly at different moments. Not rhythmically, not predictably, just enough to suggest intent. He positioned himself far from the cans, often, 90 degrees off axis, forcing investigators to expose themselves laterally rather than frontally. The first soldier emerged cautiously. Binoculars came up. That was, well, the trigger. The result confirmed everything Callahan suspected. Curiosity, it seems, overrode caution. Over the next several days, the system expanded, There were more cans, wider arcs, and even variations in brightness. Eventually, sound was added using loose metal and pebbles, especially when cloud cover removed light entirely. Each stimulus forced a decision, and, each decision required exposure. This was not sniping. It was decision control. As casualties mounted, Japanese forces adapted in, honestly, the worst possible way. They centralized observation, and officers exposed themselves to verify reports. Patrols moved cautiously but visibly. Fear did not stop investigation. It delayed it, making movements more predictable. Captured diaries later revealed the psychological collapse. Soldiers stopped trusting what they saw. Officers doubted their own judgment. When an army no longer trusts its senses, it cannot maneuver, coordinate, or defend effectively. By the fifth day, over 100 soldiers had been killed, not through reckless aggression, but through disciplined attempts to understand an environment that had become deliberately misleading. Callahan didn't win because he was a better shot. He won because he shaped behavior. These days, modern military doctrine calls this perception management and false signature warfare. The terminology is new, but honestly, the principle is not. The same logic, it applies in survival, reconnaissance and modern conflict. Control what the enemy notices, decide what they must investigate, and really force decisions that benefit you before contact ever occurs. After Bougainville, Japanese manuals, interestingly enough, started to include warnings about unexplained visual anomalies. Doctrine, in fact, changed because of something as simple as soup cans. Callahan himself, he never returned to frontline sniping. Instead, he became an instructor, teaching that truly it was creativity, not aggression, that kept soldiers alive. That right there is why this story matters. Not because of the kill count, but because it shows that wars are often decided by those who really understand how humans think under uncertainty. If this kind of frontline truth matters to you, go ahead and subscribe to Warfare Frontlines and share this episode with someone who thinks history is just dates and maps. Keeping these lessons alive isn't nostalgia, it's preparation.